I'm Anthony Jewett from St. Mary's in Park City, and this is Rejoice in Hope, an audio series on discovering Jesus Christ. When we struggle, we need others around us to give us hope and to help us keep going. When we do come together as a community or as a society, there might be struggles that make us feel strained or bitter towards each other, but it's far better to work with each other to find solutions and common grounds than it is to try to solve our problems on our own. There's a greater, albeit invisible, issue that seems most prevalent to us today. Too many of us are trying to do things on our own rather than relying on others. It's a very easy problem to fix. We simply need to rely on others. Communities are never perfect, but they give us what we need as human beings. They give us hope and a sense of purpose. The real danger we face today is loneliness. And loneliness is not just solitude. We can even feel it when we are surrounded by others. As a church, we need each other. We cannot go through life alone because we were not made to be separated from each other. And it's simply not enough to be in the presence of others. We need to have a common goal for which we come together. St. Paul speaks often about us being different parts that make up the same body. We come together with different abilities, skills, or talents so that together we build up the body of Christ. If we want to combat the loneliness that has become pervasive in the world today, we need each other, and we need to work together to focus on Christ. Even when we are separated from our communities or our loved ones, we will never be lonely if we have Christ. But this only really works if we have an authentic understanding of who Christ is. If we see Christ as just a nice guy who lived 2,000 years ago, he won't bring us any comfort in times of loneliness. And if we see Christ as just a divine person who lives apart from us, we'll never feel close to him. We must get to know who he truly is before we trust him to guide us through these moments of loneliness, turmoil, or confusion. The goal for this audio series is for us to slowly get to know Jesus a little more. Like any relationship we form, we have to start somewhere. And the only way we get to know another person is by constantly forming a bond with them that strengthens over time. I think that for many of us, we might know of Jesus and what he did, but we don't truly know him. This series is an opportunity for us to point out the little signs and indications that he constantly gives us so that we can pursue more of a relationship with him. And just like any other relationship in our lives, we need to meet Jesus for the first time in order to start this process. And we all meet him in the same place, the Gospels. The Gospels give us the opportunity to approach Jesus through the person he actually was. But many people disregard the Gospels because they want to approach them like a historical text that should be studied. In the 4 Gospels, there are plenty of contradictions, repeated scenes, and implausible events, which makes studying them as history very difficult. But there's a big problem with wanting the Gospels to be an impeccable historical account of the life of Christ. The Gospels are not biographies. They're testimonies of people in the early church, of events that led them to follow Jesus and to give their lives for him. And if those early Christians wanted the text to be historically accurate, they would have chosen one extensive gospel, but they didn't. Instead, what they did was they chose 4 with plenty of contradictions between them. And on top of that, the early church rejected many other gospels from even being considered scriptural. We have 4 gospels because these were the ones that were true depictions of the person of Christ, unlike those that we rejected. And there are contradictions between the Gospels, but they're there for 2 reasons. Each Gospel was from a specific perspective, and none of them were written with the intention of being a biography of Christ. So, for example, Matthew wrote his Gospel to the Jews, Luke wrote his Gospel to the Gentiles, Mark wrote his Gospel as an account of Peter's perspective, And John wrote his as how he understood the events he witnessed. If we tried to dissect these stories about the life of Christ in the same way that we do other historical works, we would be making a huge mistake. Because when we try to be objective with historical events and the stories about those events, we try to separate details that are realistic from those that are fantastic. And we throw out anything that sounds impossible. So if we were to do that with the Gospels, all of Jesus' miracles and healings would be completely disregarded. Also, our entire faith is built upon Jesus' resurrection from the dead. If we wanted to treat the Gospels like other historical sources, we would throw out the most important event within them, the whole reason why they were written in the first place. If we want to learn who Jesus really was, and we use the Gospels as the way to learn this, we simply can't study them in the same way we study other texts. When we do, what we are left with are Jesus' teachings and our personal interpretations of those teachings. And if we're interpreting Jesus' teachings according to what they mean to us individually, we downplay Jesus' humanity and instead get millions of different individual Jesuses that all happen to agree with our personal opinions and worldviews. And none of these accurately tell us who Jesus really is. They also tend to focus on one aspect of his teachings rather than looking at him as a whole. But if we look at those who knew him most personally, especially those who actually wrote the Gospels, we will realize that they didn't want the Gospels to tell us about Jesus' life. They wrote the Gospels because they wanted to tell us about the things that made them convinced that Jesus was the Son of God. They were so convinced of this that most of them gladly went to their deaths for no reason other than testifying to this claim. This should make us realize that we cannot reduce Jesus to a historical man to be studied. There's more to him than that. He's someone who we can get to know beyond a biography or historical study. He's someone that we can know personally. Over the next few weeks, we're going to dive into how we can get to know Jesus a little better. For now, we know that it is through the Gospels that we can meet him for the first time and use them as a jumping off point for our relationship with him. We can also listen to the words of those who knew Jesus best, who tell us how incredible it is to have an active relationship with him. In his letter to the Romans, Paul tells his listeners that Jesus walked in our shoes. He empathized with our pain and problems, and he lived in solidarity with his people. And Paul implores us that once we know Christ, we are called to imitate him in our actions to each other. We should contribute to those who are in need and exercise hospitality. We should bless those who persecute us. We should rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Jesus did these things for us, and he continues to do them. So when we imitate him, especially in these moments of frustration and loneliness that we're experiencing globally right now, we will rejoice in hope, we will endure in affliction, and we will persevere in prayer.